This is Damon Fordham, Adjunct Professor of History at the Citadel in Charleston Southern University, and I'm going to talk to you today about the mostly African-American holiday known as Juneteenth. Now, there is so much misinformation and confusion on that subject, as is many others, on social media and on the internet. So, as a professional historian, it's the duty of people myself to correct such things and give the people the facts to the best of our abilities. So, here's the story of Juneteenth. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln was the president when the North was at war with the South. And Lincoln, being a man of his time, toyed with such ideas as colonizing black people to Africa or Central America, as well as compensating the former slave owners, as was done very briefly in Washington, D.C. in 1862. But he later came to abandon those kind of schemes, and on January the 1st, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was passed. Now, it said, in part, that and by virtue and power and for the purpose aforesaid, I hereby do and declare that all persons held as slaves within the designated states and parts of them are now and henceforward shall be free, and that the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authorities, will recognize and maintain the freedom of said persons, and I hereby adjoin upon the people so declared to be free to abstain from violence unless in the necessary self-defense. That part gave Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, a fit, because Jefferson Davis said, wait a minute, what you're planning then is a Negro insurrection against us, the South. And Lincoln said, I know, because that's going to help us win the war. Anyway, it goes on to say, and I recommend to them that in all cases when allowed, they shall labor faithfully for reasonable wages, and I further declare and make known that such persons of suitable condition will be received in the armed service of the United States to garrison forts, positions, stations, and other places, and to man vessels of all sorts in said service. In other words, one of the main reasons why Lincoln went ahead with the Emancipation Proclamation was that that African Americans, once freed, could serve in the United States Army and Navy and help to defeat the Confederacy. Strategy. Now, along with all of that, however, this was enforced basically in the areas where the Union troops had overtaken certain southern lands, such as the Sea Islands of South Carolina, where they were freed immediately. Now, over the next year or so, Lincoln negotiated with great black leaders, some forgotten, like Abraham Galloway of Wilmington, North Carolina, the Reverend Tunis G. Campbell, who would later relocate and lead the African Americans in St. Catharines, Georgia, and the great freedom fighter Frederick Douglass. And meeting with these people convinced him that, I'm going to need something stronger than this. So in 1864, he pushed for the 13th Amendment to the Constitution that would end slavery throughout the country. However, on April the 11th, 1865, Lincoln made a speech in Washington, D.C., where he called for African Americans to attend public schools and for many of them to obtain the right to vote. Well, there was this guy in the audience named John Wilkes Booth who wasn't very happy to hear that. And 3 days later, he assassinated Abraham Lincoln. Now, in the South at that time, you had the vast majority of African Americans were forbidden to get an education. So a lot of them couldn't read and write. And there were slave owners who kept their people in slavery long after they should have been freed. So therefore, on June the 19th, 1865, there was General Gordon Granger of the United States Army, who then came into Galveston, Texas. So while he was there, he noticed that a lot of the African Americans still believed that they were in slavery. So he led his troops to the Osterman Building on Broadway in Galveston, Texas, as well as the Reedy Chapel AME Church. And he read the Emancipation Proclamation to the people and let them know they were free. And he went to the Galveston newspaper and published this notice that said, "The people are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between masters and slaves." Now, even the Emancipation Proclamation didn't go that far. And the connection here for existing between them becomes that of employer and hired labor. Progressive for its time. Well, after that, the African Americans celebrated, and then 1 year later, on June the 19th, 1866, the freedmen gathered at the Reedy Chapel AME Church and celebrated the first anniversary of their freedom, and thus this would be celebrated every year afterwards on June the 19th, and the idea of the celebration spread throughout Texas, where the people on June the 19th would have barbecues, picnics, brass bands, dancing, and great celebration, just as many others would do during the 4th of July. And the idea of so in 1940, the great jazz saxophonist Louis Jordan made a song called the Juneteenth Jamboree, which you could also find on YouTube. And the song was very popular, and it spread the idea of Juneteenth throughout the country. And it gained even more traction in 1980 when Representative Al Lewis passed a bill in Texas that made Juneteenth a state holiday. And as the Texas people began to spread throughout the United States, the idea of it spread to where it is today, celebrated in many places throughout the United States. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the story of how Juneteenth came to be and what it is. And this is Damon Fordham to tell you all, Happy Juneteenth.